be able to grab every single thing. And that does pretty much the same thing here. So if we had 30 items here, it would grab all 30 items in this list. If we wanted to grab 3 items, as we did before, we would do 1, and then you would just add 3 to that, to 4, and it would stop. So a little bit confusing. This takes a little bit to wrap your mind around, but the good thing here is that you take notes. You can make notes however you feel comfortable with, and these tricks should be useful for you. So let's try another thing. What if we said something like movies, and we did this one in reverse? We just did something like this. And we did save. Let's print it out. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to print When Harry Met Sally, because it's going to stop at the 1. We never get to 1 here. Again, similar situation when we have this set to 3. We never get to 1, we stop at 1. So we're going to grab everything before 1, which is going to just be When Harry Met Sally. We could set this to 2, and we would grab the hangover in this as well. And just to prove concept here, so that I'm not crazy, you could see here the hangover gets added in because we get 0 and we grab 1. You could also think of this, if you don't confuse yourself, as grabbing 2 items out of the list. But make sure you don't confuse yourself, because if this number were to be like 2 through 4, then it would be something completely different, right? So you need to make sure that you understand where from the list that you're actually grabbing. I'm just going to Control Z these back. There you go. So from here, let's do 2 more tricks. Actually, we'll do 1 more trick and then we'll move into some other items related to lists. So if we say movies like this, and we want to grab the very last item, we can just put in a -1. And so grab the absolute last item off the list. That way, like if you have a list that's 2,000 items long and you don't know where it ends, you could just do -1 and it's going to grab the last item for you. And then you can see there, it grabs down The Exorcist. So cool little tricks. You might not use these for a while, and you probably won't see these come through, at least in anything we're going to really do in the course, but they're still incredibly useful to know about because they are included in the basics of Python. So if you're going to know the basics of Python, and you will use these sometime in your lifetime, it's useful to know this kind of stuff. So we can also do some things with lists as well. We can print out the length of our list. So we could say length of movies, something like this, and give that a go. And you can see that there's 4 items in that list. So we've seen length before with strings, and it took every single character inside that string. Here it's taking every single amount of item inside a list and it's printing that out. We could also append items to the list. So we could say something like movies.append, and what if we really like Jaws and we added that into our favorite movies? You can't have too many favorite movies, come on. So let's go ahead and try printing that out. And, well, we'd have to actually print it, sorry, movies.append, and then we'd say print movies now. And it should print out with Jaws added in. Where do we think Jaws is going to actually add itself into? Well, if you said the end of the list, you were correct. So when we append something, we append it to the very end of the list. What if we wanted to delete something from the list? We could say something like this: movies.pop and print movies. Let's see what happens here. And now we got rid of Jaws. So when we append to the end of the list. If we want to delete the very last item in the list, we just use pop. Now, if we wanted to delete something like the first item or the second item, we could do movies.pop and let's say 0. We print movies. This will remove the very, very first item in the list. We should see When Harry Met Sally disappear. And there you go. No longer is When Harry Met Sally in our list. So this is a quick way that we can remove these items and on the fly, if we need to get rid of this. So the high level overview here, and the thing that you really need to take away, is that lists have brackets. We're going to see something called dictionaries later. We might see something called tuples later, and they all look very, very similar. But here, lists have brackets. Inside those brackets are what we have that are called items. Okay, and there are many different ways to return items. The reason that I'm showing you these different ways is so that you can get familiar with the syntax, that we start our list or our items with 0 and not 1, and that we can grab from these lists in different ways. Okay, and this will come back into play later with how we can utilize the same kind of syntax with other items as well, or other things in Python. So we can also utilize, printing out length, or we can do a dot append and add to the list, or a dot pop. And there's a lot of different things we can do here to append to these lists or remove from these lists, etc. So this is just the basics, but hopefully what you take away from this is that lists have brackets, and there are items in a list and they start with 0. Those are the key takeaways. So in the next video, we're going to briefly talk about tuples, and then we're going to move on into looping. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, let's briefly talk about tuples. Now, tuples are like lists, but they're not like lists. So lists are what we call mutable, meaning that they can be changed. Now, tuples are immutable. They cannot be changed. Now, for this course, this is the last time you're going to be seeing tuples, but it's important to define what they are so that you know them, you know how to identify them, and they're just in the back of your mind as, hey, I know what a tuple is, and that thing is immutable. I can't change it once I have it. So let's take a look at a tuple. Okay, let's make a new line here and start a comment. We get to say tuples do not change. And also we can put parentheses like this, because remember, lists had brackets. Tuples have parentheses. So we're going to say something like grades. Now we're going to have an item that won't change. So we're going to define grades here as just A, B, C, D, and F, which is common for the US grading system. And this is an example of a tuple. So again, we have parentheses instead of brackets. Now, if we were to go in here and we were to try to do a grades.pop, for example, and try to remove one of these, not going to be possible. Or a grades.append, we're not going to be able to put something else in here. This is immutable. We cannot change this once we have it defined. So we can go ahead and print out our grades. And we could say print out grades. Let's print out a B. And that will work. And you can see now we printed a B. So we have similar features or abilities that we did here, but we cannot change it in any way. So once we have this defined and set, that's it for us. So this is it. I just wanted to quickly show you what a tuple is. Again, we're not going to get into it at all in this course, but it should be defined, and we should know the difference between a list, which is mutable, versus a tuple, which is immutable. So in the next video, we're going to get into looping. So we've already covered looping in the bash scripting section of the course, but we're going to go ahead and get into the Python version of looping as well and make some more sense of it. So I will catch you over in the next video. Now moving on to looping. So we introduced looping in our bash scripting video. And we took the for loops and we made one-line for loops, and those should be familiar to you. So a for loop is just a start to finish of an iterate, right? We wanted to run that ping scanner, for example, and we started at the 1 and we ended at 256 on our IP sweep. Now we're going to introduce that in Python form, and we're also going to introduce a while loop. Now the while loop is going to come back into play later on in this course, especially when we get into the exploit development part of the course. So a while loop, just think of it that it executes as long as something is true. So let's make a new section here. We're going to do a new line as usual, and we're just going to go ahead and just say something like looping. And let's go ahead and start with for loops. So we'll do for loops, and let's note that this is just the start to finish of an iterate. Okay, So let's say, for example, that we have a list. Okay, let's go back to lists and we'll say vegetables. And let's just throw some vegetables in there. You can pick whatever you want. I'm going to do cucumber. I'm going to do spinach. And how about cabbage? Okay. And again, your list can look however you want it to look. Now, for this for loop, we're going to say for x. And remember, same thing with bash. X can be whatever you want to call it. You can call this for veggies. You can call it whatever you want. I just like to use a letter because it's simple to type out. We're going to say for x in vegetables, we're just going to print x. And what do we think this is going to do? This is going to go through this list, right? It's going to say for every item in vegetables, I want you to print that out. So we're going to grab cucumber, we're going to grab spinach, we're going to grab cabbage. It's going to print, print, print. So let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and save it. We'll run our script here. You can see that it printed cucumber, spinach, and cabbage. So again, you've seen this before, just a classic example of a for loop. As long as we have something to iterate through, we're iterating through a list here. And remember before, again, we were like sequence 1 through 255. We iterated through that to do our ping sweep. So we're just iterating through something. That's it, really basic. Now, we also have while loops. So we'll say while loops, and these execute as long as true. So later on, you're going to see something that says while true. It'll be capital, while true. We're going to do something. Don't worry about that right now. For this example, what we're going to do is we're going to say I equals 1. Okay. And so we set a variable I, that's equal to 1. Now let's do a while loop. We're going to say while I is less than 10, I want you to go ahead and print out I, and then we're going to iterate I plus equals 1. So this should all start tying together from what you saw earlier. Remember that we had the plus equals and we're adding 1 to something. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, I equals 1. And you know what? While I is less than 10, I want you to go ahead and print out I. Then we're going to say, hey, I is plus or equals 1. So that means I is now going to be 2. Then we're going to go back through this loop again. Now, while 2 is less than 10, go ahead and print out that it's 2. Make it 3. 3 is less than 10. Over and over and over and over until this condition is no longer true. The second that this I becomes 10, this loop is now no longer true and it's going to stop. So we're going to go ahead and save this here. Let's go ahead and print this out. And you can see that we just printed 1 through 9 as expected. So you're going to get to see these again. You're going to get examples of them again. As of right now, I just want you to understand that a for loop is an iterate and a while loop executes as long as true. Okay, so don't worry about how they're used quite yet. Just understand what they are, what they mean, and then you're going to see them come up in practical examples later on. It'll make a lot more sense as we go through it. So we're going to move on to the next video. I'm going to go ahead and catch you over there. Okay, we are moving into, I don't want to call it advanced Python. I just want to say more advanced than where we were before. If previously we were in a 101 class, we're moving kind of into some 102 material. I wouldn't even call it 201 material. This is just more advanced beginner stuff. How about that? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start a new script. That way we can kind of have our new 102 section here and kind of improve upon what we've been doing a little bit. So what I want you to do is I just want you to gedit, and we'll just call this new script.py, put a little ampersand at the end as usual. And we're just going to declare our bin python 3 here, if I can type it out, bin python 3. And we're going to go ahead and talk about our first concept, which is going to be importing. So importing is important. When we say importing, Modules are existent in Python, right? And we have a lot of them built in, but there are these modules that are not built in but available to us. For example, a module called sys. Now, sys does a lot of important things. Sys has to deal with anything related to system functions and parameters. One system function and parameter that we can do is something like printing out the version of Python that we're running. So you could say print sys.version. Okay, now if we go to do that and we say save and we just go ahead and say Python 3 new script.py, you can see the name of sys is not defined. So we're getting an error here. Well, that's because we haven't imported it. So what we can do is we can say import sys, and up here we can go ahead and just give this a nice comment next to it, and we can just say that sys is a system, a function, and parameters. Okay, and then let's go ahead and save this, and now let's go and run it again. Now you can see that we are running Python 3.7.5 RC1, and we have now successfully printed this out. Why did this work? This worked because sys does not by default come imported. Some items are already built in by default. Sys is not one of them, but sys is very important and we're going to use it over and over again. So you're going to see it a lot. One of the most frequent, if not the most frequent, along with OS is another one, import OS. You're going to see a lot of that over and over. So why are we going to see this? Well, we have things like argv. So argv is arguments. So when you think about from the bash lesson like $1, you know, when we had an argument and we were doing our ping, like our script.sh, and we had our IP address here as $1, something along those lines. Well, those are the same thing. We just call it argv in Python. That's something. Another thing is if we want to say sys.exit, which you're going to see again later in this course, we do a sys.exit, that exits Python cleanly. We need a sys.exit. So you're going to see sys quite repeatedly. On top of this, there's more things that we can do with modules. Let's go ahead and delete this. And let's say that we wanted to import another module called datetime. Now this does exactly what you think it does. But what if we wanted to import a specific part of datetime? We didn't want to import the whole thing. We just want to import one module. We can say from datetime, import datetime. So we can do the same thing with sys. We can import a specific part of sys, or we can import all of sys. So with datetime, we're importing a specific part of it, right? And we can do something like print datetime.now, something like that, and it should print us the date time. So do this. You can see now today's date is 11/16/2019 and what time we're recording. So we can also do another nifty feature when it comes to importing. We can import with aliases. So instead of from datetime, import datetime, we can say import datetime as something like DT. You could say import with alias. And instead of having to write datetime.now over and over and over, something like that, we can just write DT. It's shorter, we know what it means, and we don't have to write out datetime, which is kind of lengthy. So print it again. You can see it still works. So importing is important. I'm going to say it again. You need to know that we're going to be importing certain modules out of Python. Most of these are built in. There are occasional times you're going to have to go out and download something and put it in your library and import it that way. But for this course that we're doing, you're only going to be importing from things that are pre-existing with Python. So not everything is automatically ready to go. Sometimes you have to import things in order to improve upon your script or make it do what you want to do. So we're going to build off of this when we start writing our scripts, and you're going to see this repeatedly. You're going to also see this again when we do our exploit development part of the course. So let's go ahead and move on. We're going to move on to some advanced strings, and we're going to get close to wrapping up here and start building out some cool little Python scripts. So I'll see you over in the next video. Okay, let's talk about advanced strings. So everything I'm going to show you is not going to be used in this course, but I still think it's important to know. And there's some important syntax in here to know as well, and just different ways to handle the information that is in front of you. So let's go ahead and just print out a string, or let's make a string first. Let's do a string of my name. And we'll just say, my name is Heath. And similar to before, if we printed out our name, we could say print my name. And then if I wanted to print the first initial of my name or first letter in my name, I would just do something like this, right? So this should be familiar. And if we wanted to print out the last letter, we could just say -1. This should be familiar to you from the list lesson. So if we go ahead and we print this, we just say Python 3, and we do our new script again. You can see that we have big H and a little h because my name ends in both, starts and ends in both. So we could also do something like take a sentence, and we could say sentence, this is a sentence. And if we wanted to print out the first word of the sentence, we would have to know the amount of letters in it. So we know here that there is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this would be 0 through 3. So let's say if we wanted to print out sentence here, and we knew 0 through 3. So remember, we don't have to put 0. We could just put something like this. And then if we did through 3, it would only cut off at the I. Remember, we have to go one further from our list lesson. And we'll be able to print out the word this. We could do the same with sentence. We could go forward a bunch if we want to, or we could do a -9, because this is 9 characters long, through something like a -9 through -1 would pull out that whole sentence, or the word sentence, I should say. So we can manipulate data this way. We can also split data. So we could say something like print and do sentence.split, and this will split based on a delimiter. Now, the delimiter here is by default a space, and we covered delimiters in bash scripting, and we're just going to say, hey, every time there's a space, I want you to split out this sentence. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I made a mistake in my script. I didn't spell sentence correctly, which caused an error in the initial script. So let's try that again. So you see here it says this, that's what we were expecting from this one. And here we have this is a sentence. It now breaks these out into individual words based on a delimiter. So let's go a little bit further. We can join a sentence as well. So let's have a scenario here. Let's say we want to split a sentence out. We'll say sentence split is equal to sentence dot split. And now we just split out the sentence, right? And we're putting in this variable of sentence underscore split. Now we could also join a sentence. So let's make a new variable and we'll call it sentence join. And here we can just say, based on a delimiter, I want you to put a space in between everything here. So every time you see a word in this sentence split, so let's go ahead and join. Anytime you see sentence split here and there's a new word in it, I want you to go ahead and join those with a space. And then we can go ahead and print out sentence join, and let's see what happens here. This is a sentence. So it brought it all back for us. So not only can we take away and delimit a sentence by splitting, we can also join a sentence and add our own delimiter in there as well. So one of the most important things that we need to talk about is what happens if we have a quote and we say something like, he said, give me all your money. Well, we need to add quotations in here, but if we do quotations like this, well, that's just making things really weird, right? Look at the color of the script. You can already tell it's going weird. That's going to throw an error. But we can use single quotes and double quotes, and it'll work. We could also use single quotes here, double quotes inside, double quotes on the outside, single quotes on the inside. And that's a way to have quotes inside of a string. So let's go ahead and print that out. But let's say that you were insistent and you wanted to have double quotes and then double quotes here. Well, we could do a little bit of character escaping. So we could utilize this backslash here and say, hey, we're going to keep this string a string, and then I'm going to end it right here. So this will tell me that from here to here, ignore these characters, right? So we're going to treat it as a string. Don't treat it as a quotation and end of string. So let's run it again, and you can see that quote, once we print it, we can say print quote, and we'll actually run it here. He said, give me all your money. And I realized that I tried to print earlier and probably did not print this quote because I never had the print in there, so I'm sorry for that. But we could do it either way. Again, we can put the single quotation in here, and you'll see the single quote works, but if we were to put in a double quotation, it would break it. So I'm going to Control Z a couple times, and this is what the syntax should look like. This is very, very important. If there's one thing you're going to take away from advanced strings, please take this away from it, because you need to know how to do some character escaping, and that you will encounter that again in your career. So a couple more things. Let's say that we want to have a string here. Let's just say we'll call the string too much space. And we have something like hello. And we just, copy data, put it into this, and somehow too much space in here. We can strip out the space. So we can just print too much space here. And we can do the same thing as we did before and do something like strip, like this. Save it, and look what happens. Now it's just going to print hello. There's no space around it. We're good to go. So that's a nice little feature. Another feature that we should know is, let's say we had something like print a in apple. What's this going to return? True. What it's looking for is, does A exist in apple? Well, what if we did a lowercase here? Try it again, and you're going to see that it's false. So it's very case sensitive. Well, what about we wanted to say, hey, is there an A in the word apple? And we don't know if it's capitalized, not capitalized. Well, we might say something instead like, hey, we're looking for a letter of A, and we're looking for the word of apple, right? But what about we say print letter.lower, and then we say in word.lower, like this. Now this becomes improved because we're looking for a specific letter inside of a specific word, and when we lowercase everything, we lowercase this letter, lowercase all these letters, then we're looking for a specific letter in a word. We don't have to worry about case sensitivity, and you will see this logic come into play when you're thinking about looking for specific items or specific key phrases or matching anything specific. You might want to consider putting everything in a lowercase and then trying to find it that way, unless you are critical on case sensitivity. So this will probably come up again in your career as you look at code. So if we run that again, now you can see that it returns back true. So one more thing I'm going to show you, and there's a lot of things that we can do with advanced strings. I don't want to beat too much into it because I really feel that this can get into overkill because there's so many things and tips and tricks that I can show you, but I really feel like some of this can be out of scope for the course. But I do think that as long as you're taking good notes and it's valuable now, you're going to have that as something to remember and look back upon as you do more Python development. So one more thing is a format. So let's say that your favorite movie is The Hangover. And we'll just keep that as a string. And let's just say something like print my favorite movie. Now, we have done in the past is And we could just say something like this plus, you know, string if it's not a string, or we just say movie, right? And then we'd have to add a period in here, something along those lines. We can improve upon this. We could say my favorite movie is, and then we can just add a little placeholder here and then put a period. Now, what we do after this is we just say dot format and then we say movie. And now it knows to put in the movie that we have here, or the variable that we have stored in movie. It knows to put it into these brackets here. We save this and watch what happens. My favorite movie is The Hangover. So you don't have to do a bunch of spacing, and if things get weird, you know, with your string, or you know how to write out your sentence, it's very easy to just have these placeholders, and then if things change, you know, it just updates easily. So this is a very nice way to hold things in a placeholder without making these weird formatting changes. So I like this method opposed to the concatenation method that I showed you in our first video on strings. So if you're going to take away some things today, just take away that, you know, we have different ways of doing things. We've shown you with the list before of the 0 and the -1. I told you it was going to come up again. Just know that, again, 0 is the first item or first letter or first whatever when we're talking about Python and we're talking about our variables, lists, strings. Always start with a 0. There's different ways to do the same thing and apply them across other items, right? So I've shown you this with lists, I've shown you this with strings. So get those wheels spinning and think about how you can utilize some things. Now, sentence has all different kinds of methods that we can use with it. And again, we're just touching back on methods and making it a little bit more advanced. But you see that we can split a sentence, we can join a sentence, we can strip a sentence, or we can strip a string. So understanding that there are a lot of cool methods. The lower method, we could do an upper method. We talked about those as well. Knowing the different types of methods per, say, like a string or per class, or however you want to combine it together, is important as well. So always do your research when you are looking into, you know, how can I improve it? So if you're saying like, hey, is there a way to make something uppercase? Just go to Google and say, hey, how do I make a string all uppercase? And of course it's .upper, but if you didn't know that, then, you know, the Google machine would know that for you. And a lot of your code is going to be found on Stack Exchange or on Google, etc. So just be aware that these things exist, and be aware that there are better ways to format your strings, and there are important syntax when it comes to escaping your quotations as well. So that's it for this lesson. We're going to have a couple more little lessons here, and then we're going to move into script building, and then we'll be starting our hacking journey. So I'll catch you over in the next video. All right, we are in the home stretch, everybody. So we're going to cover dictionaries now. And when we think of dictionaries, we need to think of key value pairs. So let's go ahead and make a new section called dictionaries. And we'll just note key value pairs. Probably put a slash here, key/value pairs. And we'll also put a little note of curly braces like this. So let's talk dictionaries. So let's say we have a dictionary and we want to have a menu. Let's make a drink menu. Again, make this however you want. I'm going to make this based on some alcoholic beverages. You can absolutely make this more, you know, PG or PG-13 or however you want to make it. But let's say a White Russian. We go to a bar, there's a White Russian on the menu, and that White Russian costs $7. And there's also an Old Fashioned, and we just say that's $10. And then we have a Lemon Drop, which is $8. So we've got these, and we'll close off this with a curly bracket. And this is what a dictionary looks like. So if you were to print out drinks, we would return our dictionary. So let's do that. If I would make this the correct syntax, this would work very well for me. I am human after all. So you see here, White Russian 7, Old Fashioned 10, Lemon Drop 8. So what you can note here is that the drink is your key and your price is your value. So you have your key value pair here. So key value, key value, key value. Let's think of it as another way. We don't have to just have one parameter or one value. We have to have a key. We can have multiple values to a key. So let's talk about employees. And I'm going to use one of my favorite TV shows, which is Bob's Burgers, to do this. So let's say we have employees and we have different departments. So let's say we have a finance department. Okay, and inside the finance department, we've got Bob, we've got Linda, and we've got Tina. So we got 3 employees in the finance department. Then we've got an IT department. And inside of IT, there might be Jean and Louise. We'll add Teddy to this too, why not? I'm gonna have to move this over because it's a little bit long. And then let's do one more department. Let's say that there's a department of HR, our favorite department. And we'll say there's Jimmy Jr. and Mort. All right, so this is our dictionary. Now again, we can print out employees and we should be able to see our dictionary here. Save this, give it a print. Okay, you can see finance.